I have a question.
Huh?
How come that, I remember when I used to watch Popeye when I was a kid, there's two different Popeyes, aren't there, and two different Brutuses? Or Blutos? Aren't there two characters that look a little bit different? On the Brutus or the Bluto or whatever his name was?
Oh.
Two companies took it over.
Well, let me explain to you something. Here's an interesting thing that a lot of people don't realize. Yeah, you know, Popeye was a well-known comic strip. In fact, it was considered really literature back when E.C. Segar was doing that strip, one of the great strips of all time. And in only one strip did Popeye eat spinach. Now, the spinach is more attributable to Max Fleischer Productions. You know, that Max picked on that and it became a gimmick for the thing. Now, only in one episode did Popeye fight Brutus. He was in a boxing match, but they needed a villain for the Popeye series, so Brutus became the character. Well, they named him Bluto for the Popeye pictures. Now, what happened was when with the advent of TV, through some fluke you see, the Kingfisher Syndicate owned Popeye, but the way the contract read, they were paid for each, you know, the residual on each episode they did, and that's all the money they got. So when they began to release the Popeye series for TV, the people at Kingfisher Syndicate were really kind of amazed to find they weren't doing any more money. That the Fleischer organization got the money and that was it. So they had a guy named Al Broadnax who said, okay, we'll make our own Popeye series for TV. So there are two series of Popeye on TV, the old theater Popeye, and then the new ones that were made especially for TV. And they went back to using the word Brutus, the character Brutus, because they worked more on the terminology that used in Kingfishers. But so that's all I know about the difference. They were Bluto and Brutus.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
Why did they choose to do Bullwinkle down in Mexico?
Huh?
Why was the Bullwinkle series done down in Mexico?
Why not?
That was a great idea as far as I'm concerned. But was there a reason? Was it
Yes, there was a reason. The thing is, if you want to turn out a half-hour cartoon show, you've got to go where there's a talent pool. And you can't go to Waxahachie, Texas and get it done. You've got to go where there's people. Now, the reason, when they were looking for someplace to put the show, they were considering Japan, they also considered Spain. But down in Mexico, there was a little cartoon studio named Valmar, which was headed up by Ernie Terrazas and Carlos Rodriguez, who were two old Disney men. So they decided they would go there to Mexico, and because they figured these guys heading up, they would get closer to the feeding for the States. And so that was the nut from which they recruited people to come work on that show. And we had 180 Mexican artists working for us down there. And some were, and we had a number of people coming through, you know, like Rudy Zamora and some of the Mexican nationals who had been in the States for some time went down and helped get that thing rolling. But that's why it was in Mexico.
Did they ever air the Bullwinkle show in Mexico?
Huh?
Did they ever air the Bullwinkle show
Oh,
in
they do
Mexico?
now.
Show it in Mexico?
They do now.
Oh, they do now.
No, but at the time I was working on it, they did. It was not. And I'll tell you about that in a minute. What?
So I have a question. How did the character of Bullwinkle come about? I mean, just like, how did he come about to be?
Well, Jay Ward, see, back in the early days of TV, they had a kind of a satire show with very limited animation called Crusader Rabbit. And Crusader Rabbit's sidekick was a tiger. So now Jay Ward's got another story, and instead of the rabbit, you got a squirrel. Instead of the tiger, you got a moose, which is funnier than a tiger. And that's about all there was to it.
That's all he wrote.
But the thing is, down in Mexico, you know, they had to change up the names of our stuff. Like, for instance, the Flintstones are called Los Picapiedras, the Chip Rocks. Woody Woodpecker is El Pájaro Loco, the crazy bird, and Donald El El Pato Donald, the Duck Donald, or Pascual. And Bugs Bunny is El Conejo Boogs. And Dennis the Menace is Daniel El Travioso, Daniel the Terrible.
Oh.
So our crew had no trouble with all the names of the characters in the Bullwinkle show. Let me tell you something. The Mexicans had no respect for the Bullwinkle show at all. To them it was just a bunch of junk, because they didn't understand the humor. And they had no way of knowing what kind of impact the show was having in the States. It wasn't Disney, the characters were ugly, and it was a piece of junk, and they treated it like a piece of junk. But of course, Bullwinkle was designed for anything. The worse it was, the funnier it was. See? So, you know, they would send the storyboard and soundtracks down there, and we would produce it. So when they got ready to come into the Latin American market, see, our people down there never saw it until we just show it to them. But now they were getting ready to enter the Latin American market with it. And so our staff had no problem with any of the names except Bullwinkle. They call him Bullwinkle. And which to me, I thought that was close enough, you know. But no, they were going to change Bullwinkle's name to Pavarotti, which I asked what that means. It depends on who you talk to. There are some people that said it meant nothing, you know, like Cantinflas and Capulet and so forth, just names. And some people said it meant Crazy Moose, so I don't know. So when they got ready to go into, you know, get ready to go into the Latin American market, New York wrote me. See, I worked for New York. I didn't work for Jay Ward. I worked for Producers Associates Television. And they didn't want to know what I thought. I said, look, Bullwinkle is a classic. And with one small change, you can, you know, you're going to change the titles anyway. You can bring Bullwinkle into line with the rest of the world. All they got to do is take Bullwinkle, and those last two letters, they just switch them from L-E to E-L, and it comes out Bullwinkle. So that's what they did. I saved Bullwinkle's name. It was not named Pavarotti. So in Mexico, he's Bullwinkle.
Well, when they dubbed the Spanish, you know, over, did the Mexican actor?
What?
When they spoke Spanish for Bullwinkle's lines?
There was no Spanish spoken for Bullwinkle's lines.
So when it aired,
The soundtracks, oh, you mean down in Mexico?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I have no idea what they did. I'm sure they did what they usually do is they got, what they did usually in Mexico is they find people who closely approximated the voice, the original voice, and they would rehearse them with the film, and then they would record a track, and of course animation is more or less, we do it vowels and so forth, so it's not precise lip sync, so it worked. Now, for instance, at Disney's, I saw Pinocchio in French, and I saw Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in Russian, and it looked like perfect lip sync. It was if you accent and so forth. And down in Mexico, I knew a guy named Busto. He was an expert film editor. In fact, John Ford would always use Busto when he went to, if he was shooting in Mexico. And Busto would, like, for instance, he was doing Spanish tracks for American sitcoms, and I went over and sat with him one day when he was doing a Dennis the Menace. What they did, they got a bunch of actors who sounded close to the original cast, and they would rehearse them, and then they'd do these things in French, and Busto would sit there and he'd juggle that track down to a hairline, and suddenly it looked like perfect lip sync. He was a master at that, and I'm sure that's what they do with Bullwinkle.
Buenas noches, ¿qué hora es?
That's right. Hey, I'll send you. No, well, it's too late for you, but anyway.